A small joke, a careless promise, something said without thinking, meant to make a moment lighter. It looked harmless at the time, almost forgettable. But years later, that one sentence came back with weight, consequences, and a future no one could have predicted. What began as an offhand remark would grow into a choice that could change lives, alliances, and the course of two worlds forever. Commander Ethan Cole wiped sweat from his forehead as he tightened the last bolt on the ship's damaged engine panel. The metal was still warm under his gloves, humming softly as power flowed back into the system. The hangar air was thick with heat, oil, and the sharp smell of burned wiring. He had been working for hours without a break, his shoulders sore, his hands aching, but his focus never slipped. This was his ship, and he trusted it only when he fixed it himself. He stepped back, stretched his stiff fingers, and looked over his work. The repair wasn't perfect, but it was solid. The engine would hold. Years of service had taught him how to make broken things work again, even with limited tools and tight deadlines. As one of the most experienced pilots and engineers at the remote outpost, Ethan spent more time with machines than with people. He liked it that way. Machines were honest. Something failed, there was always a reason. Around him, the hangar slowly came to life as cooling systems kicked in and indicator lights blinked from red to green. Beyond the open bay doors, the alien world of Solara shimmered under twin suns. Ethan barely noticed. To him, worlds changed, but work stayed the same. Fix the ship, check the systems, prepare for the next mission. Familiar and safe. He reached for his toolkit, ready to log the repair and move on, when a soft voice broke the rhythm of his thoughts. It was quiet, uncertain, and completely out of place in a hangar full of heavy machinery. That single interruption, small and unexpected, was the moment everything truly began, even though Ethan had no way of knowing it yet. Ethan turned toward the sound, expecting a technician or a junior officer, but instead he saw a small figure standing near the edge of the hangar. It was a Celeran child, thin and short by human standards, with pale blue skin and large curious eyes that reflected the overhead lights. Her clothes were simple, clearly not meant for a place filled with heavy equipment and moving machinery. She stood very still, as if afraid that even one wrong step might make her disappear. "You shouldn't be in here," Ethan said, lowering his voice without meaning to. He set his tools down and crouched so he wouldn't seem so tall and intimidating. "This place can be dangerous." "I know," the girl replied, through a small translator clipped near her collar. Her voice sounded soft but steady. "I just wanted to see the human ship. My teacher says humans build things with their hands, not just with machines." Ethan smiled despite his exhaustion. "Your teacher isn't wrong," he said. "We still like to get our hands dirty." He glanced back at the engine behind him, streaked with grease and burn marks. "It's not pretty, but it works. What matters?" The girl took a small step closer, her eyes moving from Ethan to the ship and back again. "You fixed it yourself?" she asked. "Every part I could," he answered. "If something goes wrong out there, I want to know exactly how it was put together." She nodded as if this answer confirmed something important. For a moment, she just watched him, studying his face with a seriousness that felt strange coming from someone so young. Then, without hesitation, she said, "When I grow up, I want to marry a human like you." The words caught Ethan completely off guard. He laughed, the sound echoing lightly through the hangar. "That's a big plan," he said, amused. "You've got plenty of time to decide things like that." She tilted her head. "Is that a no?" Ethan shook his head, still smiling, and spoke without thinking, the way adults often do when talking to children. "If you grow up and still want to, maybe I will," he said lightly. "I'll marry you when you're grown." Her eyes widened, and her face lit up with pure excitement. "You promise?" she asked. "Sure," he replied casually. "I promise." A distant voice called out in the Celeran language, sharp with concern. The girl turned quickly, then looked back at Ethan. "My name is Lyra," she said. "Don't." "Forget I won't," Ethan said, giving her a small wave. She ran off, disappearing through the hangar doors in a blur of motion. Ethan watched her go, then let out a quiet breath and shook his head. It was nothing, he told himself. Just A child's imagination and a harmless joke. He picked up his toolkit, logged the repair, and went back to work, unaware that he had just spoken words that would follow him across years. Stars and choices he could no longer undo. 10 years passed faster than Ethan ever expected. Missions blurred together, outposts changed, and alliances grew stronger. Humanity and the Celerans worked side by side now, sharing technology, trade routes, and research stations across several systems. What once felt new and fragile had become stable, almost routine. Ethan rose through the ranks during those years, earning respect not through politics, but through results. Ships under his command rarely failed, and when they did, he was usually the one fixing them with his own hands. Now in his early 40s, he commanded a permanent joint base orbiting Solara. His days followed a familiar pattern. Early mornings in the hangar, inspections, reports, and the quiet comfort of machinery, responding the way it should. He preferred the hours before the station fully woke up, when it was just him. The low hum of power systems and the faint vibration of the hull beneath his boots. That morning felt no different. Ethan stood beside a patrol ship, reviewing diagnostic data on a wrist display when he heard footsteps behind him. Not hurried, not hesitant, confident. Commander Cole's voice said. He turned and froze. Standing at the entrance of the hangar was a Celeron woman. Tall and poised, her pale blue skin smooth and luminous under the lights. Long silver hair flowed down her back, neatly braided with thin strands of crystal that caught the light as she moved. Her eyes were the same striking shade he remembered, calm, focused, and unmistakably familiar. For a moment, Ethan couldn't speak. His mind searched for explanations, for coincidence, for logic. Then she stepped forward. The memory clicked into place with unsettling clarity. "You don't remember me at first?" she said gently, a small smile forming. "But you should," Ethan swallowed. "Lyra?" he asked, the name feeling unreal. On his tongue, her smile widened. "You remember?" she said. "Good, that makes this easier." He stared at her, heart pounding. "You were a child," he said slowly. 10 years ago. "And now I'm not," she replied calmly. "I've come because you made me a promise." The hangar suddenly felt too quiet, too small. Ethan ran a hand through his hair, trying to steady himself. "Lyra, that was just a joke," he said. "I didn't mean it seriously. You were a kid." Her expression didn't change. "On Solara, promises made to children matter most," she said. "They are believed to be honest, because they are spoken without strategy." Before Ethan could respond, footsteps echoed again. Several officers entered the hangar, stopping when they saw who stood beside him. One of them cleared his throat. "Commander," the officer said carefully, "the Celeron Council is requesting your presence immediately. They say it concerns a marriage agreement." Ethan closed his eyes for a brief moment. The harmless words he had spoken a decade ago no longer felt small at all. They felt heavy, permanent, and impossible to escape. The council chamber was bright and silent, its curved walls glowing with soft light that shifted as voices echoed through the room. Ethan stood at the center, his posture straight, his hands clasped behind his back the way years of command had trained him to stand under pressure. Lyra stood beside him, calm and composed, as if this moment had been expected all along. Around them, Celeran council members watched closely, their expressions controlled, but curious. This was no private misunderstanding anymore. It was a matter of culture, law, and diplomacy. "You must understand," Ethan said carefully, choosing each word with precision that among humans, we often speak lightly to children. Promises like that are not meant to be binding. They're meant to be kind. His voice was steady, but inside his thoughts were racing. He could already see the consequences forming, the strain this could place on everything humanity had built here. One of the council members leaned forward slightly. "On Solara," the counselor replied, "a promise given to a child is considered pure, free of manipulation, free of hidden intent. It is the strongest kind of vow." Several others nodded. In agreement, Lady Lyra has prepared for this moment for many years. Ethan turned toward her, unable to hide his disbelief. Prepared? He repeated. Yes, Lyra said softly. I studied human language, customs, and biology. I trained in diplomacy and governance. I did not come unprepared, Ethan Cole. She met his eyes without hesitation. You shaped my future with your words. I simply followed them. The room fell silent again. Ethan exhaled slowly, rejecting her outright. Would insult Celeron law and damage the alliance. Accepting the promise blindly would mean committing to a future he had never chosen. The weight of command pressed down on him harder than any battlefield ever had. After a long pause, a senior counselor spoke. There is a path that honors both cultures, she said, at a formal courtship period. Limited in time, structured at its end. Either party may withdraw without dishonor, provided the effort is genuine. Lyra's eyes brightened slightly. Accept, she said immediately. All eyes turned to Ethan. He hesitated, then nodded. I will agree to a courtship, he said, with honesty and respect. The decision rippled through the chamber like a released breath. The alliance remained intact for now. As they exited the hall, Lyra walked beside him, her pace unhurried, her presence steady. You handled that well, she said. Ethan glanced at her. This buys time, he replied. That's all. She smiled, confident and unshaken.
Time is all I need.
The days that followed were carefully structured, filled with rituals, shared duties, and long conversations meant to test compatibility rather than emotion. Ethan approached the courtship the same way he approached everything else, with discipline and caution. He learned Celeron customs, attended formal gatherings, and fulfilled every obligation expected of him. On the surface, he remained professional, controlled, and distant. But slowly, without noticing exactly when it happened, his resistance began to soften. Lyra was nothing like the child he remembered. She spoke with confidence and intelligence, her thoughts sharp and well-considered. She challenged him openly, questioned human logic, and explained Celeron values without arrogance. When they walked through the gardens of the council complex or shared quiet meals overlooking Solara's oceans, Ethan found himself listening more than speaking. There was no manipulation in her behavior, no desperation. She did not chase him. She simply stood beside him, certain of who she was and what she wanted. One evening, during a ceremonial gathering under Solara's glowing sky, Ethan finally understood why she unsettled him. She wasn't trying to claim a promise anymore. She was offering a future. The realization caught him off guard, stirring something he hadn't felt in years. He had spent most of his life choosing duty over personal connection. A duty and connection were slowly becoming the same thing. The turning point came without warning. Late one night, alarms echoed through the station, a joint human Celeron vessel had been sabotaged. Engineers rushed to contain the damage, and security teams sealed the hangars. Ethan was already moving, issuing orders, his mind snapping back into command mode. Sabotage meant intent. Intent meant someone wanted the alliance to fail. Lyra arrived moments later, her expression serious. This was deliberate, she said. After reviewing the data, the damage targets human design systems specifically. Someone wants blame, Ethan replied, in conflict. Before they could say more, a summons arrived from the council. Emergency session. Mandatory attendance. As they moved through the corridors together, Ethan felt the shift again. This was no longer about a broken promise. Forces were moving against them, and their connection was suddenly more than symbolic. The council chamber was tense when they entered. Accusations filled the air, subtle at first, then sharper. Questions about timing, about loyalty, about boundaries crossed too quickly. Ethan answered calmly, but he could feel the situation slipping toward something dangerous. Then Lyra faltered beside him, her hand pressing lightly against her abdomen. The room noticed immediately. Silence fell as she straightened and lifted her chin. There is something you should know, she said clearly. My medical systems have confirmed a biological event previously thought impossible. Ethan turned to her, confusion flashing across his face. I am carrying a child, Lyra continued, A child of both our species. The chamber erupted. Voices overlapped, disbelief and fear colliding at once. Ethan stood frozen, the weight of her words crashing into him all at once. This was no longer diplomacy. This was history, unfolding in real time, with them standing at its center. The reaction was immediate and violent in its intensity. Council members rose from their seats, voices echoing off the glowing walls. Some spoke in shock, others in outrage. Words like impossible, dangerous, and unnatural filled the chamber. Ethan felt the world tilt slightly as he processed what Lyra had said. A child, their child. The idea felt unreal, yet something deep inside him recognized the truth of it. Before he could speak, a Celeron counselor stepped forward, his tone sharp and cold. "This confirms our worst fears," he said. "Certain factions warned us that close integration with humans would lead to contamination. This union is proof." Ethan's jaw tightened, but he remained silent. Placing himself subtly closer to Lyra, the council session ended abruptly. Not with resolution, but with orders, investigations, medical reviews, security measures. As they left the chamber, alarms began sounding across the station. Reports came in quickly and chaotically. Lyra had been taken. A security breach. Transport cleared without authorization. Someone had moved faster than anyone expected. Ethan didn't hesitate. He issued commands with calm authority, mobilizing every available unit. Intelligence reports pointed to an extremist Celeran group that opposed all off-world alliances. They had sabotaged ships before, stirred unrest, and now they had taken Lyra, not for negotiation but for erasure. The rescue came down to minutes. Ethan led the operation himself, piloting a small craft through rough terrain toward a hidden facility deep in Solara's northern mountains. There was no grand speech, no hesitation. Only focus, only urgency. When he reached the facility, he moved through it with precision, disabling guards and bypassing systems the way he always had, step by careful step. He found her in a medical chamber, restrained but conscious. Fear flickered in her eyes when she saw him, then relief. "You came," she said softly. "Always," Ethan replied, freeing her and pulling her into his arms. "I promised." They escaped as the facility fell into chaos behind them. The truth came out soon after. The sabotage, the abduction, the false accusations, all traced back to the same extremist faction. Public exposure dismantled their influence almost overnight. What they feared most had become visible to the entire galaxy. Months later, the noise had faded. Ethan stood beside Lyra on a quiet hillside under an open sky, far from council chambers and command decks. Pregnancy showed now, unmistakable and strong. Scientists from both worlds studied the child's development with awe. What was once thought impossible had become undeniable. "This all started with a joke," Ethan said quietly. Lyra smiled, placing his hand over her abdomen. "No," she replied gently. "It started with honesty. You just didn't know how powerful it was." In time, the alliance between humans and Celerans grew stronger than ever. It's not because of treaties or shared technology, but because of trust. Because of a promise spoken lightly, remembered seriously, and fulfilled not out of obligation, but out of choice. And somewhere between two worlds, a future was being born that would belong to both. Years later, Ethan stood on a wide-open field. On Earth, the sky clear and blue above him. The air felt different here, lighter, familiar, and grounding in a way space never was. Lyra walked slowly beside him, her hand resting on her stomach, her movements calm and careful. She had adapted to Earth better than anyone expected, curious about everything from the wind and the trees to the way humans let nature grow freely instead of shaping it into perfect lines. Representatives from both worlds had gathered for the ceremony. Humans in formal uniforms stood beside Celerons in flowing garments that shimmered softly in the sunlight. There were no weapons, no tension, no fear, only quiet attention and history in the making. What was happening here was more than a marriage. It was a symbol, one that would be remembered long after they were gone. Ethan looked at Lyra as she faced him, and for a moment, the years elapsed into a single memory. A hot hanger, a tired engineer, a small child with curious eyes. He never imagined that one careless promise would lead him here. And yet, standing in front of her now, he knew he would not change a single word he had spoken. They exchanged vows in simple language, words chosen not for politics or tradition, but for meaning. Ethan spoke of choice, of respect, and of standing together even when the universe pushed back. Lyra spoke of patience, of belief, and of seeing possibility where others saw limits. When they placed the rings on each other's hands, her child moved gently, as if aware of the moment. Later, as the gathering slowly turned into quiet celebration, Ethan and Lyra stepped away from the crowd. The sun dipped lower, casting long shadows across the field. She leaned against him, and he wrapped an arm around her shoulders, feeling a calm he hadn't known before. "You once said you'd marry me when I grew up," she said softly. Ethan smiled. "I didn't know what I was saying," he admitted. And yet she replied, looking up at him, "You meant it more than you realized." He placed his hand over hers, over the future they carried together, a bridge between worlds. A child born from two species, not as a mistake or a threat, but as proof that understanding could grow where fear once lived. Above them, a Celeron ship crossed the sky, visible even in daylight. Two worlds, sharing one horizon. And at the center of it all was a promise that had waited years to be kept, changing everything not through force, but through kindness, choice, and the quiet power of words spoken without knowing just how far they could reach.